The location of a country's capital city is one of the most important choices for any nation's leaders to make. They contain important government facilities, offices, and headquarters, and usually contain the primary residence of the nation's leadership. The capital city is basically the brain of a country, and choosing the location of where you want to place your brain is, of course, a highly strategic choice. Most often, the best location for a capital city is somewhere that can be easily defended, and from where you can exert control and project unity over the rest of the country. Capitals need to be seen as representative of the entire nation, and be easily accessible to the largest number of people possible. And for all those reasons, capitals are most often built within the center of a country. But sometimes, the choice of an old location ends up, eventually, just not working out. For example, in 2005, Myanmar moved their capital city away from old Yangon, the largest city in the country, and towards Nay Pyi Da, more than 300 kilometers to the north. This was done because Nay Pyi Da is more centrally located within the country than Yangon was, and it was also a transportation hub located right next to 3 chronically turbulent and rebellious states. And so it was felt that the presence of the capital and the military so nearby would help to improve the region's stability. And further, it was ruled that the old capital of Yangon was simply more vulnerable to climate disasters since it was located directly on the coast, as was showcased in 2008 when a cyclone smashed directly into it and destroyed 3/4 of the city's infrastructure. In a similar manner, Brazil also moved their capital city back in 1960 away from the historical but by then overcrowded Rio de Janeiro on the coast and towards a deeper and more centralized location within the Brazilian interior that they ended up calling Brasilia. This decision was largely made in order to encourage inland growth away from the coasts, and to make the capital city more regionally neutral. And then, of course, there was the Great Showdown in Australia back in 1927, when neither Sydney nor Melbourne could agree on which city should become the nation's capital, and thus they ended up compromising by building Canberra roughly in between them from scratch. Now, in the year 2022, there are 2 very large modern countries who are actively in the process of relocating their capital cities for pretty familiar reasons. Egypt is relocating their capital away from Cairo towards a newer, planned city still under construction a bit over to the east, while Indonesia is relocating their capital city away from Jakarta and moving it more than 1,000 kilometers away to a completely different island. This is incredibly significant, because Indonesia itself is an incredibly significant country. She has the 4th highest population of any country in the world, lagging only behind China, India, and the United States, and boasts more than 270 million people. For such a large country, however, Indonesia is rather unique because while China, India, and the United States are all major and generally contiguous continental powers, Indonesia is really about 17,000 totally separate islands, all scattered apart from each other, and these islands are not equal. There's 5 big land areas that Indonesia controls: the entire islands of Sumatra, Java, and Sulawesi, and half of the big islands of Borneo and New Guinea. However, 4 of these island territories are fairly sparsely populated, while the thousands of smaller islands add little to the overall population as well. By and large, that leaves the island of Java, which alone is home to more than 60% of the entire Indonesian population, 145 million people. This makes Java by far the world's most populated island, with even more people than Russia, a country that is 123 times larger. And so it's pretty fair to say that this island is basically the center of Indonesia's population and culture. And so naturally, the capital of Indonesia has been located on Java for a very long time, and it's located right here, Jakarta. Jakarta has been a pretty major city for centuries, but with little fanfare in the modern 21st century world, the city's metropolitan population has skyrocketed to a population of around 35 million people, which makes Jakarta the 2nd largest urban area in the entire world after only Tokyo, which, as fate would have it, is also located on another island. Besides serving as the capital of Indonesia, Jakarta is also the diplomatic capital of ASEAN, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which is effectively Southeast Asia's version of the European Union, and so you can sort of think of Jakarta's role here as being similar to Brussels in Europe. Jakarta is an enormously important and significant global city, but it is not without problems that make it actually a not-so-favorable location for Indonesia's capital city in the 21st century. For one, as I mentioned previously, there is a lot of inequality within the country. While Java is home to 60% of Indonesia's population, the island only makes up 7% of Indonesia's land. land. Ultimately, that means that the remaining 93% of the country's landmass, over on the 17,000 other islands, are pretty underrepresented both in terms of population and in economics. While the economy in both Jakarta and Java has been growing tremendously over the past few decades, the other islands have been more or less economically left behind, and have remained fairly stagnant. To illustrate this point, ever since 1971, Java has gained 75 million people, while Sumatra has only gained 38 million, Kalimantan, what the Indonesian side of Borneo is called, only 11 million, Sulawesi only about 10 million, while Western New Guinea only gained 4 million. And while these other islands may look close by on a map like this, they really aren't. If you place the islands of Indonesia over Europe, with Java placed roughly over northern Italy, you'd quickly see that Kalimantan is as far away as northern Germany and Poland. Sulawesi is over in Belarus and Ukraine, while Western New Guinea is way over in Kazakhstan. A lot of these places are very far away from Jakarta and are therefore isolated and remote from the center of power, often across thousands of kilometers of ocean. Based exclusively on the centralization of power factor, it would make the most sense from a geographic perspective to place Indonesia's capital within either Kalimantan and Borneo or on Sulawesi. But of course, centralization alone is not usually a good enough reason to go through all of these moving pains. The larger motivations are that Jakarta itself has a lot of issues. To start, the city has experienced a tremendous amount of urban growth in the past few decades. Back in 1945, at the beginning of the Second World War, the city's population was only 600,000 people. 25 years later, by 1970, the city's population had increased by six-fold to more than 4 million. And then 50 years later from then, by 2020, it had more than doubled again, to more than 10.5 million within the boundaries of the city proper, largely owing to massive internal migration from the rest of Indonesia. As a result of all this growth, the city has been experiencing a substantial ecological breakdown, accompanied by intensely gridlocked traffic and congestion. Nearly 4.5 million cars and more than 13 million motorcycles are used on the city's streets, while public transportation only accounts for a third of the city's commuters.